Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everyone. It is our second Wednesday show with Books Forward. We love them. We do these shows every month with them, and then so many more shows with authors that they represent, and they always bring us the best. We have fiction, fantasy, all kinds of things, and then we get into the hard stuff. And that's what we're doing today. I'm very excited to have Heidi Yewman join us about her memoir. It is called Dumb Girl. And dang, I hate that title, but I know why she has to use it. It's called Dumb Girl, A Journey from Childhood Abuse to Gun Control. This is quite a story, and it's going to resonate with so many people across this country and around the world. Gun violence and trauma and abuse, childhood abuse is not anything we have not heard about before, but it's important to keep that light shining on it and to make positive change. You can go to HeidiYewman.com, and I've also linked that in the episode notes because the book is out on August 19th, and you can pre-order it. So welcome, Heidi. How are you?
Thank you. So nice to be here with you today, Lisa.
I know. Welcome to the show, and I tell you that I don't like your title. I'm sorry. Dumb Girl.
No.
Well, I hate that. I just, you know what I mean? I'm glad you used it as a title, but the dumb girl thing really, it gets me.
I also don't love it. So on my computer with all of the book promotion and stuff, it's all my files. I've had to change from Dumb Girl to DG because it really gets in my head. And we can talk about why I titled it that way, or why the publisher titled it that way.
But let's do that. Just dive right in, because I know that the words are powerful, no matter, what people think. So tell everyone about the title.
Yeah, so the title actually came from my own experience as a child. So I grew up in a family with three brothers, and it was very, I would sort of call it a toxic masculinity kind of family. And the values in my family was being male and male oriented. And so being a girl didn't really work so well. So what I was continually told, there was a mantra throughout my whole childhood where my brothers and my parents would say, "Don't be a dumb girl." And what it meant was, if I saw a spider and I screamed, "Don't be a dumb girl." If I fell down and skinned my knee and was going to cry, "Don't be a dumb girl." If I had to pee, if I had any kind of emotion, if I had anything that seemed girl oriented or weak, I was told, "Don't be a dumb girl." And so what happens is that sort of started really resonating in my head. And so I was constantly trying not to be dumb, and I was trying to not be a girl. And so I got really involved in athletics and sports. And so that certainly worked in my family. And I was very successful, ended up with a full ride volleyball scholarship to college. And so I really found myself in that place, and I loved sports. But anyway, so along with the title, then in fifth grade, my dad found out that I had failed my social studies class. And he was a very violent, angry man, had a hard time controlling his anger, was physically abusive, emotionally abusive. And so when he found out about this grade, I had just a terrible night of hitting, punching, slapping, throwing, all this kind of thing. And so it was really bad. But then what made it even worse was then when he got done and sort of with all of his getting his anger out, I suppose, he told me to go get all of my F papers, and he had me spelling tests, didn't matter, math, whatever. And he had me tape them onto my bedroom wall. And as I'm doing that and I'm crying and I get done, and he said, "Now all your friends will see how stupid you are." And the thing about that, Lisa, is, just the fact that he did that. But then every night I fell asleep to that wall, and every morning I woke up to that wall for months. And as an 11-year-old, that really affects you, and you start to really believe it. And so then I was too scared to take a test or do a paper without cheating, because I couldn't afford to fail again. And so once you start cheating on spelling or math, and it's a building block on itself, that knowledge. So then I would feel dumb, and it just continued and got worse and worse and worse. And so my whole life, I've really identified as this dumb girl, and it's continued through into my adulthood. So I walk into a room with people, whether it's a board or some group I'm with, and I just automatically assume that everyone is smarter than me.
Mm.
And I view smartness and dumbness based on academics. And so I've had to really work hard in my adulthood to reframe that. And a lot of my book is about that, about how I figured out that I'm not dumb, and how I figured out that, being able to read a room is certainly a skill.
Yeah.
I'm very empathetic. That's a skill. I'm a great mom. That's a skill. And so anyway, I've had to learn these things as an adult and sort of shed this thing that I really believed about myself.
That's really hard. And at the same time, it's like if you do good in your grades, it's almost like, see, I did the right thing in teaching her. You know what I mean? It's almost like it's a double-edged sword that you're walking on. It's like, all right, if I go get these good grades, then he's going to be happy. But then it's like letting him know how to treat you again
Yeah.
for
Well, and then
anything.
when you get an A on a test and you've cheated, you don't feel very good about
Mm-mm.
yourself, right?
No,
Because
no.
you didn't really earn that. And so again, going into athletics and sports was a true thing. I was really good at
Mm.
athletics. And the other thing I loved about playing sports is there was a referee. So if I was playing basketball and I shot a ball and somebody hit me, which is against the rules, right? Hit my arm as I was
Yeah.
shooting, then the referee would blow a whistle, play would stop. He would say, not so overtly, but okay, you did something wrong, so now there's a consequence, and now you get 2 free shots. And so that I loved the rules. I loved the rules were maintained. Everybody followed the rules, because that certainly isn't what was happening at home. And I
Well,
was
the
constantly
rules,
having to guess,
rules are
right?
so crucial for growing up, and even like with pets, So we travel the country full time, we pet sit, and it's like you have to have the rules so that the pet knows where it belongs, and it's actually a form
Mm-hmm.
of love. Rules are a form
Yeah.
of communication. It's not necessarily negative. As kids, we're like, I don't want any stinking rules, but actually we do. We want a foundation. And so your
Yeah.
foundation was traumatic. That's not a foundation. It's a foundation of trauma, truly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's the rules and then the boundaries, right? So here's where you can be. And so I didn't have
Yeah.
boundaries with my siblings growing up. And so I experienced
Mm.
sibling sexual abuse because of that.
Oh.
There was no boundaries, there was no rules. We had a sign on our wall. We had a swimming pool in our backyard, and it said no swimming suits allowed after 5 p.m. And I think it was meant as a joke, but as an 11-year-old with brothers with no boundaries, that's not a great literal sign.
It's creepy. Now,
Yeah, yeah.
how's that with your mom? I know that can also be really harsh when you look at here's the female figure and you look to her for it. And I know in a lot of these cases, sometimes the woman is so controlled by the husband at times
Yeah.
that's and you look at her like hello, and then there's the whole mom and the son thing. I can't explain that. I don't want to get in trouble, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I think
I'm
so.
so gonna get in trouble.
I do know what you're talking about. So my mom was an alcoholic, and
Mm.
so she wasn't paying attention in the way that I think she would have had she not been drinking. And so I was really
So that's
left to
her
fend for
coping.
myself. Yeah.
Wow. So she's not there for you. You got brothers who can't keep their hands to themselves, and your dad either.
Yeah.
That's hard. So sports is a great thing, though. I think
Yeah, it was a
it
great
also
rest.
it teaches you teamwork, and you're not alone.
Boy, that's for sure. Now, certainly no one, since I've written the book, no one has known about my past. And
Totally.
I've been so
Yeah.
filled with shame for my whole life, and not talking about it. And so what I ended up doing is part of my book is also about, you mentioned in the upfront about gun violence. And so I went to high school and graduated from Columbine High School, and I graduated 13 years before that massacre. And Dave Sanders, the teacher that was killed, had been my basketball coach.
Mm.
And so when I went back to and he had also coached my 3 brothers as well. We'd all gone to school there. And so when he was killed, I went back to his funeral and to the mass memorial. And it was at that funeral where I saw these former teachers with swollen red eyes, and I just we were just all in shock at the tragedy that had unfolded. 12 students killed at their own high school, and along with the teacher. And so it was at that funeral, sitting in the pew, and I thought, I've got to do something. I've got to get involved in this. I don't want this to ever happen again. And I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old at the time, and I just didn't want this to happen to them and to anybody else. And so then I got involved in gun violence prevention. And then that was a place where, like sports, I could find myself and I could face my demons. I could get involved in something that I was passionate about. And I led protests. I did vigils. I interviewed people about who'd experienced gun violence and wrote a book. I produced a film about people who'd shot and killed somebody. And so it was all these things. And that's where I found my voice and I found my power. It was through that activism. And so that's a lot of the stories in the book are involved around that, and ultimately being really harassed online by gun extremists.
Yeah, this when people have gone through traumatic situations, a lot of times they do become activists for something, right?
Yeah.
And it's because it's a way of stopping the pain, even if it's for yourself, and it doesn't matter when, right? Because that always has its own time of when it's going to do its thing. And so when you stand up, it is a form of standing up to what happened in the past, and also to prevent it, especially when it comes to kids. We all want to prevent that. We all want to prevent what's going on with it, because when the cruelty is so bad, I think, I'm not a therapist or anything, but I think that when something is really bad and we cannot sit there and go, well, in this world where everybody's supposed to be nice to each other and kind and all this good stuff, it is so insane when something really bad happens and you're just in shock, and how it can be flippant and be repeated. That becomes this like, how can that happen? Why? And then it's like, why me? And it's like, and then it spirals. I mean, sexual abuse goes into it spirals into another way and another way. Promiscuous? I can't say the word. Well, women, I know this, women will get a little bit promiscuous. There you go. I could say it that way. And it's a form of control on a flip side. Therapists could explain this better, but it's trying to find a place of control over our own lives when something bad has happened to us.
And
helping someone else out of it, because you wish you could have helped yourself out. Kids are not able to help themselves out. And so when we get to a place where, hey, this riles me up, you're able to go, okay, no one was there for me maybe to pull me out, but I'm going to pull someone else out like I wanted. So it's like a fulfilling thing from that trauma time. That didn't make sense.
And it's interesting because when I got involved in gun violence prevention, and there was so much conversation about I was so scared of men, angry men. And then all of a sudden I'm in this field of work where I'm surrounded by men who are angry with guns. And so it was this sort of ironic, like, why would I go into this if I'm so conflict adverse? But what it helped me do was to find my power and to realize, like, oh, it's not the end of the world if somebody's angry at me. But what was interesting to me was not the fights about statistics and about legislation, but it was about the storytelling. And so what I got really drawn to, Lisa, was telling the story of people who'd been impacted by gun violence. So my first book, I interviewed 19, and they had either lost a loved one to gun violence or been shot and survived, whether it could have been suicide, it could have been homicide, it was kids finding guns that weren't locked up, those kinds of things. And I was drawn to their stories of trauma and pain. And then when I did the film, it was the same thing. I was interviewing 4 people who bought a gun for self-defense and then used it in a way that it wasn't intended, or that they didn't intend. And what I found was I was so drawn to talking about to people about their trauma and about the worst day of their life and their experiences after. And what I realized was I was wanting to tell my own story, but I wasn't in a space yet where I could, because I was so overcome with shame. And so it was easier for me to tell other people's stories. And so I finally got to a point a few years ago where it was time for me to tell my own story. Well, of pain and trauma and overcoming and resilience and that kind of thing.
And the shame part sucks. Because it's
Mm,
a true, it's like there's this cleaning thing we do as women, like, all right, something bad happened to us, sexually, or someone's made us mad, we'll clean the house, or we go and like we'll shower for hours to be clean, but it's not necessarily a physical clean, it is shame. And that to me is the worst part of it all, is this shame thing. And then people looking at you if they know something, or like
mm.
if you are, a victim of violence or from a shooting or something like that, then everyone looking at you and you're like a statistic for the day's news, and it's like hopes and prayers, when I start seeing all that, thoughts and prayers, I start getting like, it's annoying, you know,
Yeah,
it's well, I think for people, but
Mhm.
it's kind of like, oh, let's just put a Band-Aid on something that, didn't need a Band-Aid. It needed like, serious help. So I think
Yeah.
the shame part, it's that plays little things in there, but to get it out, I mean, do you feel better writing it down and then now going to publish it? You haven't hit that part yet, and I think it's gonna. I'm hoping that you have like book clubs if you feel up to it, where people can have these conversations, because then people don't feel so alone. And I think that's what's the beauty of memoirs and biographies and stories. You're very, very right. Stories help. People don't feel alone, whatever trauma it is, guns or
Yeah.
not.
No, you're right. And writing it down, there's something about that process. I was telling my husband, I feel like I've given therapy to myself, because as I was writing, so I was working with an editor, and I wrote a story about, like, the one I just explained about my dad hitting me and this terrible night. And then she said to me, "Okay, great. You wrote this down and you told the story, and it's compelling and interesting and horrifying, but I want to feel what you were experiencing. What did he smell like? Were there lines on his face? What did his burrow look like? Like, I want all the senses." And I thought, oh my gosh, like, really? To go through
We're just
and
like, oh yeah, this happened.
re-experience
Yeah.
this? Right.
Yeah.
But it did. It forced me so that the reader could be engaged and be alongside with me in this story, which is what we always want when we're reading a story. Is I had to give these details, but I had to go back and relive them in order to bring them up and remember them. But and with shame, I tell the story, I think it's one of the first chapters in the book, about I was at this event right when Me Too was happening. And I was at this play called Vagina Monologues, and
Oh yeah.
Jane Fonda was at it. And
Oh.
there were, yeah, who's amazing. And there were all these other stars. Exactly. So a friend of mine was directing it. And so I was sitting in the second row. And at the very end, again, this was right when Me Too was happening, she came to the front of the stage. So she's just feet away from me. And she says, there's a lot of women in this audience, and we've just experienced this play, and we're all feeling a lot of things. And so I would like to invite all of you in this audience who can say Me Too to stand. And so we can all stand in solidarity. And it was this lovely gesture. But what happened to me, I was sitting with my husband, he's holding my hand, he squeezes it. And so I was going to, she says this, and all of a sudden I get just this huge drop of shame. I feel like, okay, I can definitely say Me Too, but if I stand up, I'm on the second row. I can't see if anyone's standing behind me. So what if I'm the only one? I don't want to look back, because what if Jane Fonda sees me look back and thinks, what, you're not brave enough to not look back? Right?
Oh
Well,
my
she's
gosh.
not thinking about me,
And
but
this is
this is
all
what's
going in
going through my
nanosecond.
head, and like so quick. But, and so I do stand, but I didn't stand in solidarity. I stood in shame. I stood because I had to, in reluctance, but I didn't want to. And I didn't want to say Me Too, because I don't love that that's my history. But then she created this incredible moment for all of us to stand together. And I did it, but it wasn't this empowering moment. And so then, Lisa, afterwards, I was so mad. I was mad that I couldn't stand and just own my stuff and own what I've been through and own that I've grown from it. And so that's kind of the moment I said, I've got to write this book. I need to get this out. I need to stop trying to control it, because at that point I would tell a friend here or I'd tell a friend here because I didn't want people to really know and it was embarrassing. But why would it be embarrassing? I didn't do anything wrong, right? I grew up in this family where this stuff happened. And so I think that's the insidious thing. But telling my story, writing it down, and I've already been talking to a lot of different groups. There's a sibling sexual abuse group that's incredible online through Facebook. There's a childhood sexual abuse group. And it's people who've come together and they want to share and feel like they're not alone and they're not a weirdo. This stuff really separates us and makes us feel alone.
Yeah, and I think it's important so it doesn't repeat, because there's a duty, I think, that we all have, and that is to stop it. And
Yeah.
it's to stop it. And so I always look at it that way, and I think that's part of like even stopping the gun violence, which is this country's gun happy in a silly way that's killing people, killing children. You go to places and you look around and you're like, uh-oh. And I'm very aware because I was raised that way, just raised in different, I've had guns to my head. We've lost, my uncle to gun violence, and we're just we're not ignorant about it, and we're very aware. Like, we travel full time as two women. And so we're always scouting everything. And if we even have a second of a thought, we leave. I don't care what it is. I don't care who. No one's going to stop us on, like, if we don't feel comfortable, I'm out, because we've been through a lot of different things. And we're in a very interesting world right now, because the gun violence, yes, there's a lot of women with guns. And yes, there's the whole argument of I need it in case like someone comes and attacks my house, or there's all those arguments, and hunting or whatever. But there's a line of where people are really being able to have ultimate control by a weapon. And that is the worst, creepiest thing, because a gun pointed at you, and the way they are now, I remember when my uncle got murdered, and it was his employee that he fired. Guy went to his truck, came back. My uncle was going back in the shop. He made gymnastic gear, and the other guy that worked there, they had their backs to him, and he just opened fired and just sprayed bullets. And that was in Florida years ago. And the way we found out was he was on the news in California where we lived. I mean, that was just like, no way. So it was very traumatic for all of us, and especially my mom. That was her best friend, I remember I was dating this guy, and I was kind of freaked out, just a little weird. And it was just like, whoa. And I'd been robbed at gunpoint here in New Orleans, in this country. And it took me a while because it was in my car, gun. And then they did it to my mom and to my grandparents. And then my mom and I actually chased the guy. This is how it's going from Africa to here kind of thing, mentality. And, because we'd been through riots and stuff over there. So anyway, there's it's like a PTSD thing that will happen. You get through a situation and then PTSD comes after. Short, little ones. I remember this guy I was dating and went to his house, and there was a book, and inside he had cut it out, and there was a gun in there, and he didn't tell me. And I opened it up, and there was a gun on my lap, and I about flipped out. Like, went, because it's on my lap. And it's on my lap. I don't know what to do. I don't know if it's loaded. What the hell is this? Like, what are you doing? And we were done. Because he knew this had just happened. He's like, oh, I was trying to get you past all this. And I'm like, this is a control thing. Everybody wants to control how things go. And the gun violence is the ultimate control without actually touching, right? It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's a very creepy thing about gun violence. And now, like, with all the drug issues on top of gun violence and connected, and it's become very male female, I feel, in society now. I know a lot of women who have guns, but there's a very male, I don't know how to explain that. I'm getting in trouble for it, I'm sure.
There's a toxic male part to it, where it's like this macho. If you go into any bookstore and you see all these magazines and there's a gun section, right? And it's all about this bravado and, be your own man's man. And then we also live in a country that's hyper individualistic, and where it's about my freedom. And so when there's a school shooting, 90% of the time, the gun has come from the parents or a relative or a friend. And so we don't we don't think like that matters. But when kids, there wouldn't be these school shootings if kids didn't have access to their family's guns. And so that's a huge issue. The other thing is that, which you kind of brought up earlier, is gun violence is the number one reasons why kids are killed in America. It's the number one killer of children. So if your child dies, it's probably from being shot and killed. It's not from cancer. It's not from car accidents, which it used to be. Those used to be the top two, but now it's gun violence. And so it is a huge problem, and we're not addressing it. And it's not an easy thing to fix, right? It's not all legislative.
But Johnny's needs to be gluten-free, and that's more important.
Right, exactly.
No offense, Johnny.
No,
Little Johnny.
yeah.
I don't know why it's little Johnny today, but it is. But but we are not focused on that because we don't want to have disagreement with people.
Right. And we don't think that our gun ownership matters, but the reality is a lot of guns are stolen and then they get used in that way. When my kids were younger, I used to really advocate, and I talk about it in my book, for this campaign called the Asking Saves Kids campaign. And it's a campaign that encourages parents to ask if there's a gun in someone's home before you let your kids play there. Yeah. And so to your point earlier, if your kid has a peanut allergy, you're going to make sure that there's no peanuts in the product or in the food that your child's going to eat at their house. You're also going to make sure they don't have a dangerous dog or a swimming pool. And you might ask about what's the rating of the TV shows or who's going to be supervising while my kid's at your house, right? So this is just another question that you can ask. And what I loved about this question is it's not about gun ownership and it's not about judgment. It's about safety and the kids' safety. Because even if you're a gun enthusiast, you have a lot of guns, you don't want your kids finding those guns and using them and somebody getting killed. You're going to want them to be locked up and stored in a way that the kids can't get into them. So I thought that was kind of a cool campaign. And I thought it was a way to talk about guns without putting the politics into it and the controversy. Like, hey, we all want our kids safe. How do we make sure they're safe today at your house?
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And
yeah,
because everyone's coming from a different position too. I mean,
exactly.
To me, I think, there's a lot of guns in Africa. There's a lot of them. So you were raised with a consciousness of that, to be very aware. And, because some people, get drunk and stupid with a gun, that happens quite a bit. But kids, I know, my mom would tell this story about her sister's husband put a gun in a diaper bag and the kid took it out. Like, how did he get the gun? I mean, that's ridiculous, So it's about the safety. I agree with you. And it's a way, well, now everyone's fighting anyway, so you might as well just really go for it. The stopping of the cycle, to me, I did not know that is the number one killer of kids.
Yeah.
The number one killer of kids in this country.
Yep. Of kids and teens. Wow. So 18-year-olds, if an 18-year-old and younger, if they die, 18. It's probably from gun violence.
And then what about the kids that are using guns in violence? Because that's also become a very big deal. And kids going into schools. And that's where I go, this is like the traumas that are passed down through generations. And that's where the stopping of it has to happen. It is like.
Right. And that's all about access, right? So, if guns aren't locked up and kids have access to them, then they're going to use them, because we're modeling that on TV shows and movies about, that's how you solve your problems is with guns. And so kids are paying attention to that and they're seeing that. And then they're in mental crisis and that's what they go do. So it's a big problem, but it really isn't about, if statistically, if you have a gun in your home, was it 23 times more likely to be shot or killed with that gun or a family member die. So oftentimes people will say, I'm not feeling safe because of this neighborhood or whatever, so I'll get a gun. But what they don't think about then is, well, what happens when your child or you or your partner becomes depressed? And then all of a sudden there's this gun, because over 60% of all the gun violence, over 60% is suicide.
Wow.
So people don't think, oh, well, I might get depressed and use the gun to kill myself. You don't think that way but
you're not there at that point.
But we often talk about gun violence in terms of homicide, but it's not homicide that's our biggest problem. It's suicide.
Suicide. Wow. So why do we have so many suicides?
Well, if you use a gun for suicide, there's only a 10% survival rate.
Well, I'm saying that we need to look at why the suicide rate too. You
Right,
know,
right. Well, there's definitely a mental
yeah.
crisis in this country right now,
That's what
isn't
I'm
there?
saying. That's where I'm
Yeah,
going. It's all kind
yeah,
of connected,
it sure is.
it's kind of like we keep just putting, just keep smiling and it'll be fine. Stiff upper lip, stiff upper lip, stiff upper lip.
Yeah, how's that going for us?
Yeah, no, it doesn't, there's a balance between it all, I think. You
Mm,
don't cry over every little thing, but there's
yeah,
moments when you do need to really go, okay, this is some messed up stuff. We need to fix this. So
yeah,
I don't know, like, I think having the internet and things like that is great because kids can find out that they're not alone, but there's also a whole hidden dark side. But like if you had a
yeah,
phone when
you're
you were a
right.
kid and you saw groups where you could get help or see somebody else is going through the same kind of thing, you wouldn't have felt so alone. And then you don't feel as ashamed. At
Yeah,
least you'd have a
right.
partner in ashamedness. You know what I mean? Which means that
Yeah,
you can start climbing out. But
yeah,
that's the thing is feeling alone in these situations. And it's definitely real in this country, which is sad.
yeah,
And many other
yeah.
countries, definitely many. And it's not just this country, but women have to be aware of that because, and I know women again with guns.
Mm,
So there's that
yeah,
too. I would never have a gun just because I'm stupid in that I would just like trip over it. I'd be a dumb girl. Just kidding. But like, you know what I mean? I would be one of those that, and the media has played into that whole dumb girl thing of always been in a movie and falling over the tree
yeah. And the man
or
has to
whatever.
save her,
Yeah, and the
and
man
yeah,
has a gun, but the girl doesn't, and she's always, "Oh, save me, save me." It's so annoying. So I think we're
yeah.
also in that mode of hopefully coming out of that. That's what all these movements are about. They don't all work immediately overnight.
Right. No,
But you
I
keep
do.
going.
There is a shift in media, and I'm seeing that where it's more about women empowerment and the normal or the ways that we've told stories before are starting to be changed. And I think that's part of that Me Too movement, which it was about let's empower women to create stories because they're different. They're made in a different way from a different perspective. And then it's
Yeah.
not the women just being victimized all the time and then waiting for the man to save them because that's not the story that we're living.
And then our medical rights got taken away.
Mm,
So I wonder about that too. I always kind of look at the timing of those things and so it's just in a different it's smoke and mirrors on how things are coming out, right? So
yeah.
like when women get any kind of stand up, then now we're looking at, oh, men aren't feeling so, masculine as much, or men aren't feeling so like there's an attack on men kind of thing. And it shouldn't be. It should be growing together.
Well, yeah, and then I think the attack on men is hard because like I have a son and I have a husband and they're huge allies for women. And I've
Right.
raised our son to not be that way and there's a lot of people out there that are doing the same way. And so I think
Exactly.
to put everybody in this one category or boat of like, men are bad and it's like, well, yeah, but they're not all bad, are they?
I know I have so many male friends.
I
And
think that
yeah,
that allyship is so important. And
yeah. It's about, I think, kindness,
mm,
which is hard, and kindness and forgiveness, which is very difficult. And forgiveness is very difficult when it's really so traumatic. But it is that letting go part. And everyone talks about forgiveness, and I get it, and then I don't get it because I'm like angry at it or whatever it is. You go through those
well,
stages.
and I think oftentimes forgiveness it's framed in a religious way, right?
Yeah.
It's like either you forgive or you don't. But it's so much more nuanced than that, right?
Hmm.
Because we're in relationships with people and people aren't 100% bad or 100% good. And so there's flexibility in there. And then the whole relationship with forgiveness is it's so nuanced and I don't think people like that about it because we do love our boxes, right? We love red and blue and good and
Yeah.
bad and so when it's purple or nuanced that it's
Well,
harder to
there's a
deal
gray
with.
area. Yeah.
Right, the
Yeah.
gray, yeah.
Yeah, everything you need to fill out every box on the form. Otherwise, you're not getting anything. You know what I mean? It's that regimented kind of thing, but that's not what life is. Nature doesn't work that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
There's a bend to things. But yeah, I think the forgiveness thing, it's the forgive and forget. Like, I know Nancy and I, my mom and I always say, yeah, forgive, forget, and that you move forward. But you're always going to remember that lesson and not forget. If someone's done something, you can forgive them and move forward, but it's going to be in the back of my mind as a safety kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's our brains have evolved that way. It's a really
Mhm.
important survival skill is to be able to
Yeah.
remember. And we do what, even in sports, right?
Mm.
When you lose a big game, that hurts more than when you win the big game that
Yeah.
feels good. Like the feeling worse is worse than the feeling good, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but that's our brains are developed that way so that
Mhm.
we don't get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger or the whatever, right? It's a survival skill. And so
Yeah.
we remember the bad things, but then sometimes it can go against us. I remember interviewing this woman who's for my book, who was my first book, who her son was killed at a party. And this was 3 years after he had been killed. And she was so angry and so frustrated by it. She was just like stuck
Mhm.
and I think had PTSD. Like you, I'm not a
Mhm.
psychologist, but it seemed like PTSD to me. And so I was worried about telling her story and that it wasn't my story to tell, it was hers. And so I was worried about feeling like I was using her in
Mhm.
some way. But I said to her, I said, Michelle, who have you talked to about this? And she said, well, I've talked to God and I've talked to you. And
Ooh.
I thought, wow. So then I no longer felt like I was taking. I was actually giving by giving my time and giving, like wanting to know about her story and about her son and her loss and all the
Mhm.
feelings she's had since that day. But people do, they get stuck. And it wasn't about, for her, it wasn't, I don't think it was about her forgiving the shooter, but it was a little bit about forgiving herself of like she tried to be the best mom she could be and she let him go to this party, but like who's going to know that that's going to happen? And sort of like your uncle, right? I'm sure people have
Mhm.
personal guilt about that. And then that's where
Mhm.
that shame piece comes in. It comes in whether it's gun violence, whether it's
Yeah,
sexual
and
abuse as a child, whatever.
survivor's guilt is like huge,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's a huge part of it too. I mean, every time there's a disaster, it's like,
Yeah.
you feel it's hard. It's hard. But, trauma is just so glossed over. And I think, writing a memoir, you've got a lot of courage to do it. Courage for yourself to go through that process and then go out there in the world and go, all right, y'all, here's the story. But you're going to find more people identifying than not.
And I would love it if other people thought, "Oh, yeah, I should tell my story." And then
Mm.
I'm hoping it's kind of a contagious thing. I know I found that with the Asking Saves Kids campaign when I would ask somebody if they had a gun in their home and they'd say, no, no, we don't. But oh my gosh, what a great question. I should start asking that question. And so I
Yeah.
think whether it's gun violence or whether it's childhood trauma, I think we're always feeling so alone in it and we're not. And that's the value of like Facebook groups have been really helpful for me or community groups that I belong to. And then advocating against gun violence, that's been a community that I've been a part of. And doing that work is a way for me to not feel alone.
Yeah, it's stepping forward. It's a form of moving forward and doing it in a strong place and helping. It just feels so much better. We
Yeah.
do a lot of wildlife conservation work, and our friend who's passed on now, we were talking about this on a podcast once, and we're just saying, that we met a group of women that go out in the boonies and rescue dogs from people who shouldn't have dogs. And you are
Mm.
being greeted with a gun and, what the
Mm-hmm.
hell are you doing here kind of thing. And they rescue these dogs, get them fixed, and maybe return them or ship them out of the state. And they do, I mean, I'm going, you really could get shot doing this, like no joke, right? And
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
been at, and so I was talking to him and he was saying, people understand when someone puts you in a helpless position are the people who turn around and help the other way around. They're the
Yeah.
ones who are maybe not, they didn't think they were strong, but they're strong in this whole other way. They had no idea. And it does. We all have strength, but standing up for others or whatever it is,
Yeah.
massive
Yeah.
strength, and especially gun violence. I mean, that is That's a big one.
You're right, it does take strength, but I also think what you get from it, because
It's huge.
when it is massive. Like when you're helping other people and getting sort of outside of yourself and it gives you perspective about your own experience and your own situation, then it having other people's perspectives, I find, just
Mm,
enriches your life so much. Yeah, any way that you can get out of your own self and help other
mm.
people is really, I think, mentally.
Yeah, soulful, man. It's what we're here
Mm,
for. That's
yeah.
what yeah, I think so. That's what I hope. I'm not perfect at all, but
This podcast is like
yeah,
how incredible this community that you're building, and
yeah,
people get to
that's,
hear you to speak every week, and
oh, I'm so sorry. You're tired of my voice yet.
you're
But
bringing in people, and I've listened to
yeah.
several of your podcasts, and it's just incredible. And you turn it on, you're not quite sure who you're going to get this time, and then you
Hmm.
walk away and you go, God, that I now know this topic better, or that's an interesting perspective I didn't know about. So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
the stories, like you said, the storytelling is it, and it's also for yourself when you're telling the
yeah.
story, like you're saying, writing it. How is it like in your personal world with family and friends now, knowing this is coming out? Have you kind of given everyone a heads up? This is what's going on. You know what I
Y-
mean? Have you
Yeah,
had to have
yeah.
those conversations?
Yeah, I have. Unfortunately, my dad, who I write a lot about, he died a couple months ago, which still feels weird to even say. But so he knew about the book, but we didn't talk about the specifics of it. But yeah, from a personal standpoint, and my son and daughter know about the book, and my son's read it, and it actually brought he's 27. It's
Okay.
brought us closer together because now he understands his childhood a little bit better and my
Mm,
motivations of how I parented. So that was an unexpected gift. And I'm finding that the close friends around me who have read it, who didn't know a lot of what had happened, it's definitely enriching those relationships. So I don't know if that trend continues once the book comes out, but what I'm mostly interested in is helping other people. And I end the book with a chapter where I write to my 19-year-old self. And it's a letter to myself saying, I know you think everything's terrible and you're never going to survive this, but you are, and this is what's going to happen, and you are going to survive, and you're going to thrive, and
mm,
you're not going to feel dumb, and getting past all those things
mm,
that I thought were deficits, and where I've been able to reframe some of those things as superpowers. And so I think that I'm hoping that other people, other 19-year-olds in that situation where they're coming out of a family where they didn't have any
mm,
control and now they're living on their own, or they're going to college, or they're just not being in that original family anymore. I'm hoping that they can see that they
mm.
too can have a big life, and they don't have to be defined by the first 18 years of their life.
Well, so many people are quiet.
Yeah.
The stiff upper lip, we all know that, but then there's so many people who just bear it and they bear
Hmm.
it and they bear it and they bear it until late to their deathbed sometimes and never, get it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, when we're sick, we cough and get that out. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's, yeah. So it's, so I think when for some people who won't and maybe not, it just depends on everyone's story is so unique and different with this kind of thing,
We To
you
be
know?
sure, like writing a book is not what everyone needs to do. I mean, it can
No.
start in really small ways where maybe you journal one page once a week and just get
Mhm.
your feelings out a little bit. And then you plan on never showing this journal to anybody because maybe you put it in the fire or whatever.
Mhm.
But I think living with it and it just festering inside is not healthy, and that's not good for us. So whether it's talking to a friend or a therapist or journaling, these are all incredible ways to sort of get it out of your body a little bit.
And like you're saying, groups and things like that really help,
Mm,
so that's really cool. I think the books, people, when they just find out that they're not alone in whatever is going on,
yeah,
you find like, okay, I'm not alone. Somebody else survived. How did they survive? What
yeah,
am I going to do to survive? What are my steps? It's like always looking at, okay, like what are the facts? Take the emotion out. It's hard, but you look at the facts and then kind of really build from there. And some people have a slow journey out. And that's what
yeah.
scares me is there's so many people, locked away in cults and all kinds of stuff, in this
Yeah,
country.
that's true.
And human trafficking, all of that stuff goes hand in hand. And what's the almighty weapon to keep everyone, a prisoner? Gun, usually.
Yeah, it's true.
So to me, the gun violence goes in that, you know,
Yeah, it's
sphere
about
as well.
power. It's about power.
It is about power.
Because even like in domestic violence situation, it's not the maybe someone's not shot, but it's the brandishing the gun, it's showing the gun, it's pointing the gun at somebody, and that's all about holding
Hmm.
power. Yeah.
Hmm. And then that can get into a cycle on both sides, which is
Yeah.
also, that's what people don't see, and where it can spiral out and then get the kids. I like this where they were starting to bring the parents in for questioning if the kids took a gun to school, that they're
Yeah.
bringing the parents in. I think that's important because where are they? There's no way I would have a gun without my mom knowing. She would know. But that's, we say that, but maybe not. So it was like transparency,
Mm,
with whatever. And we had that kind of relationship. And we have a small family between the two of us of things, and our stuff is a long story. But I think the family unit needs to get to some basics in this country at times. I felt coming back here, I was 19 years old when we came here, and I thought, like, people my age were very, I don't know, I'd done a lot of living and a lot of an adult kind of lifestyle. So I felt very like, it's not like you're not having fun. I just kind of felt like you need to grow up now. Like there isn't this, and what is such a big deal is not a big deal. It's very commercial. And so that's just me personally from when I got here. And I feel like sometimes families need to face the elephants in the room. What's going on? Who's having a problem? Why? And I don't think there's any family that doesn't have some form of generational trauma at this point. And
I
if it's
think
just
you're right.
ignored, I mean, generational trauma can come from, your family being brought here as a slave, and your family's, been through abuse from slave owners, and that comes through, so it all comes out in a different way, but it has to be handled. You cannot ignore it. And I think there's a lot of ways we act out to mask what's going on. It's like, never taking a shower but keep using deodorant. It doesn't work. You need to
Mm,
take a darn shower.
yeah, right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So that's why I think books and memoirs and personal stories are crucial.
I hope your
Mm.
listeners will pick up my book, and I do
Yeah.
hope it helps people, whether people are struggling with gun violence or and the ramifications of that, or they lost a loved one to gun violence, which most families have at this point, especially around suicide, which oftentimes people don't think about that as gun violence, but it's gun violence. And then so yeah, that or whether it's childhood emotional, sexual, physical abuse. I'm hoping that folks will find their own story within mine.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. You're brave. You are. And I'm
Thank
probably
you.
going to get people yelling at me on this for this show somewhere. And I'm like, okay, well, good,
Well, that
good for
means you're
you.
not doing your job, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I get yelled at all the time, right? But it's if you're getting
Yeah.
people to think, and yeah,
I think thinking is good. And we're allowed to disagree. We're all allowed to
exactly.
disagree. It's just how do we do it?
Yeah, yeah.
You're allowed to disagree. So Dumb Girl, everyone, again, it is out August 19th, A Journey from Childhood Abuse to Gun Control. Ooh, swinging that pendulum for sure. But I really appreciate you telling your story. As soon as I saw your book was coming out, I was like, oh no, you got to come on the show. Gun violence for sure. I mean, like how it's impacted our family, it's impacted the two, kids, and
Mhm.
it the impact that it had on our family is a ripple effect that's still being felt.
Yeah, it doesn't just go away after a year. You don't
Mm-mm.
recover and then move on. It's a lifetime. Yeah.
Hmm. It's
That's
just
what's
how
so
we deal it, and we
insidious
learn.
about it. Yeah.
It's like, we say grief doesn't go away. It's how we learn to live with it. And that's the same with abuse. It's like, how do we learn to live with that? Or we know it's there. Let's look at it. All right, there you are. Now how am I going to just, it's like going to the office and hoping you don't have to talk to that one person, but it's there. They're there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Again, I've got the link in the episode notes. And don't forget, all books like to be pre-ordered before they're out. It's really good for the authors. And again, it's Heidi Yewman. And that is out in the episode notes. And that's Yewman. So HeidiYewman.com. Thanks so much, Heidi. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.